Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode of Master Your Coaching Biz, the podcast. And our guest today is Angelo Ponzi with Craft is his name, and the website is craftmarketingandbranding.com. Welcome, Angelo. We're excited to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a fractional chief marketing officer. And so basically, I focus on working with corporations and small companies as their marketing leader. I go in, I help with strategic and positioning and messaging and branding, and a lot of the kind of the upfront parts, the foundational work before we ever get on to tactics and executional things. I believe that the business or the individual really needs to understand their target audience, what makes them tick, the market, the competition, and taking all of that information really and developing that foundational plan as what we like to call building a blueprint. We call ourselves architects. And then ultimately, we get into the tactical side, we call ourselves general contractors, and we bring in teams of people to do that. My background briefly is I spent a lot of time in the advertising agency business. I actually was fortunate to build one and sell one. I've also had a company in the research industry, and I've sat in the client chair from VP of, or actually director of advertising on up to VP of marketing, chief marketing officer, chief strategy officer. So I've kind of sat in a lot of different kind of realms. And then I've been on the consulting side. This would be my third time in kind of taking this role that I have today.
Yeah, awesome. A big background.
Yeah, thanks.
It's interesting. You talk about kind of tactics, and it's interesting because when we talk about strategy, I think at least from my point of view, we mix up strategy and tactics. And I'm wondering if you can help clarify that. Like, really, when we talk about the strategy of building a business, especially a coaching business, and the marketing and the branding that goes with it, how's that different than the tactics?
Well, if we think about the tactical, so let me go back to my analogy of building a blueprint, right? You wouldn't go out and just grab some wood and a hammer and nails and start building a house, right? You have to have that blueprint. How do you want the rooms to function? How many stories do you want? So ultimately, you're building that kind of strategic approach to building a house. We'll do that. And so you're mapping it all out. You're understanding, your requirements, your needs, and those kinds of things. And then ultimately, from the tactical side, now you're actually doing the building. So if we think about tactics, a lot of people and companies that I talk to, and I say marketing, the first thing they think about is a website or social media, digital marketing, public relations, all that. That's the tactics to me. That's the how do we get the message out there? How do I talk to you as my target audience versus strategically, how do I know what kind of information you're consuming? How do I know where you're gathering your information? That's kind of the strategy part of it, is understanding how do I grow? And I like to say to my clients, where do you want to be in 3 years? Now let's deconstruct that. Let's work backwards and figure out strategically how we're going to get there. Because strategy could include acquisition, could be hiring and buying. I've worked with companies where they're buying portfolios from other people. So that's a strategy. The tactic is the physical, buying of, right? But how do you kind of lay that foundational work before you get to whatever those elements are that you're trying to utilize?
Yeah. Okay. So I think for coaches, especially newer coaches, we tend to focus in on like when we talk about branding, we tend to focus in on like our website, what our logo is going to look like what our colors are and our fonts. And of course, there's a lot more to the branding, to branding in general. But
Right.
What would you say are the main components when we first look at branding ourselves that we really need to look at?
Well, and you're right. The colors and the logo. I mean, that's part of kind of the visual execution. But to me, I look at from a branding standpoint that makes up the brand is positioning, right? Where do I sit in the market? If I'm a coach, who am I? Who do I want to work with? Who do I want to compete against? where's my niche that I want to play in? And then once I understand that, how do I differentiate myself from you as a coach, maybe playing in the same field? And so positioning becomes really important. And then that leads to that point of differentiation that I think is extremely, extremely important. The other part of branding is personality. What kind of personality? And the personality, especially with coaches and small businesses, tend to take on the personality of the founder. And so is that very conversational? Is it authoritative? Is it, informational? So that tone becomes the voice in which you're speaking with, in your writing. And that ultimately, that starts to get, of course, reflected in the tactical stuff, right? So if I know how I'm positioned, if I know my personality, if I know my tone, and I know my position, then I can write to that and I can create that story, if you will, that gets moved into the tactical stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, that your name is extremely important. Bob's really good coaching is different. Why is that different from Angelo's really good coaching, right? So looking at that name that's relevant, and that's the other side of the coin too, is that what's the relevancy to the people that you're trying to talk to, whether again it's one-on-one coaching or whether it's in a larger organization. I mean, you have to understand what's relevant to the people that you're talking to. If I'm a small business and I'm gonna bring on a coach, I need to know what you need to know what my pain points are. Why have I not grown? How do I get to that next level? What are my barriers? What are my issues? And again, as a coach, what's your process? How do you do that? What's your cadence? And so again, just kind of working all those things together to help define who you are as a brand, whether it's personal branding, right, or company branding. It's coaches tend to get more personal branding, which is again still branding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so how do they how would you suggest that? I know you're big on research, so how would you suggest that they start that? Obviously, they have to do some research, but what are the kind of best practices for them to start to look at that?
Well, so if I was going to be a coach today, and I have done coaching, but if I was going to do it today, the first thing is I would, again, who do I, what's my offering? Mm-hmm. Who are the types of clients that I want to serve? Do I want to be, a CEO coach? Do I want to be dealing with, the senior staff? Do I want business to business? Do I want consumer? Do I want, small organizations? So kind of defining that. And then I would start to research who my competitors are going to be, whether I'm going to compete on a local level, a regional level, or a national level. And then really, once I have that kind of competitive set, then I would go to everybody's website and I would look to see what they're offering, how they're talking, how they approach the market. And I tend to, when I look at competitive analysis, let's say I have 5 competitors, I'll look for what I call antis. If everybody is saying something very similar, I tend to, before I do any formal research, I tend to say, okay, this is like an anti. You have to have this because obviously it's relevant to the marketplace because everybody's saying it. And then once I have that, then of course, how do I say it differently? But you're also at the same time looking for gaps in offerings. So, if everybody's doing, once a month coaching and you can offer twice a month coaching, then that gives you a point of differentiation. And so I always start looking at who I'm going to compete with.
Yeah, and I think that's important, the differentiating for us, but also, I think taking a look at their websites and is a good first step. And a lot of coaches don't advertise pricing, but it's not really about that pricing, which I think we can get tied up in as well, right? It's looking at what are they offering and how are they coming across?
Right. And again, I don't go right to tactics, but I do have to say your website it's your calling card these days, mm-hmm. Right? There's so many statistics and I won't get into them, but guaranteed, if someone's thinking about you as a coach, the first thing they're going to do is go to your website. And if your website is, not user-friendly, not customer-centric, I don't care about how many years you've been in business, blah, blah, blah. I want to know what the value is for me. if you're in business for 40 years, I want to know that what that 40 years means to me, not just I've been survived for 40 years. And because I've got clients that have been around for 50, 60 years, and yet their revenues are still tiny compared to, companies that have been around for 5 years. So you have to look at that. I kind of losing track with it. I'm rambling on and I'm trying to get to a point. But I think that I apologize. I actually got a little
it's
lost
okay.
in there.
So yeah, just the making sure that we do the research and making sure that we're not, the due diligence, and we're not really focused in on like the money part yet, right? This is like the preliminary. Yeah,
that's where I was going with it. Sorry. So thanks for getting me back on track. So I believe in value, right? So if your price hourly is 200 or 300 or 400 or 500, we all get challenged. Oh my God, you're $300 an hour, you're $400 an hour. And the statement I give back is, it's not the $400 that you're paying by for that hour. It's the 30 plus years that's packed into that hour. And so trying to mitigate, I always try to mitigate pricing, because if people buy on price, they're probably not the client you want to deal with anyway, right? Because it's always going to be an issue. But it's about what value are you getting for that? If I give advice and someone feels that they really value this, as a matter of fact, I just brought on a coaching client just a couple of days ago, and that's kind of not my main business, but I do it. And I when I told him my rate, he was like, "Oh man, that's worth it," because my industry, all these things, and that's a great value for me because I don't have to go educate somebody. Oh. And so I think if we as coaches and business people think of the value versus the price, I think for me that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it would also make people more open to advancing in our industry, right? Because coaching, there's some things going on in coaching right now. There's some shifts going on, and I think that a lot of it has to do with pricing. People are saying, it's not worth it to pay this much for a coach. It's not worth it to pay that much for a coach, and you can get caught up on that as a coach. But specifically, what you said, it's what you bring to the table, and it's just like anything else. If if you're buying from, or if you're hiring somebody to do something for you, like fix your house, or, the plumber or the whatever, right? You're paying for their experience. And I think we have to start thinking of ourselves like that as well.
Well, yeah. And it's also the credibility that you bring to it, right? If I said, hey, I'm going to be a coach today, and oh, by the way, I'm a plumber, and now I'm going to be a business coach. I'm going to, so why, how does that relate? Well, maybe the plumber built, a pretty significant piece of business, so he's got business experience. I mean, I've been fortunate to start a couple companies and sell them, and so even though I don't come at it as, hey, I can help you grow your business because I've done this, I do use some of that, of course, but as a coach, I've been there, starting one day, and literally, it's a long story, but a very clean slate one day. It was like, okay, I could go get a job, or I could, take my money and go buy a computer and, start a business. And, how that grew and how I matured and how I changed my kind of positioning and messaging, even Craft, which is actually a rebrand of my previous company about a year ago, or a little over a year ago now. I was sitting in a room with a bunch of marketers and other people, but by the time it got to me, I heard people use the word marketing and branding and digital marketing and social media and website. So by the time it got to me, it's like, okay, what do I say that's going to make me different from everybody else? And the strategy I use is I actually went out and had coffee with every one of them. So I approached it with, I think we're different. I think we could work together. I think there's something there. And I use that as my initial research to understand, are we competitive, or is there some gray areas that we overlap? And I found almost in every situation, because of my research background, that none of them really did research. And so I created an opportunity to be able to work with every single one of them. Yeah. And so again, that was just doing that due diligence and laying the foundation, as opposed to just running out and trying to compete without really understanding the phrasing and how I differentiate myself. And I have defined a clear niche, utilizing my research background.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say that just on the niche part is that, one of the biggest hangups that some, especially new coaches coming in have is like, if my focus is too broad or too narrow, then I'm not going to, make enough money. And if it's too broad, I'm not going to be heard. And I think the too broad one is the one that's right? Like if we're too broad, we're not going to reach those people that we want to hear. Our branding is going to play, I think, a big piece into that because our messaging is built from our branding. So, what would you say to somebody that kind of says, if I'm too niche down, I'm not going to make any money. It's too narrow.
Well, again, I would look at it even just from a business standpoint is, what's your geography, what's the total opportunities there, right? It's the total addressable market. And then who else plays? I mean, I'm doing my marketing stuff, right? So what's the potential? Who else is playing in there? Who else is coaching in the same niche that I want to coach in? And then how do I understand what my potential is? And if you keep narrowing it down, I'm only going to coach, advertising agencies that are 10 million or less, and I've only been in business for 3 years and have staff of 5 or less people, then you just done this, and therefore it's going to be much harder to address versus saying, okay, I'm going to take that qualifier off, that qualifier off, that qualifier, and then you're expanding your market, and then let that market help define who you are through your marketing and your promotions and things like that. And you find you're attracting a certain type of business, then you could start to pivot as opposed to doing it up front. Let the market start to help define you.
Yeah. Okay. So just kind of getting a feel for what that niche is. And if it feels too narrow, then you can start taking away some of those pieces and see how that works. See if it helps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you go out and buy a list, for example, every time you add a new criteria on the list keeps getting smaller, right? Yeah. So it's kind of the flip. If I've narrowed my list down to, hell, there's 10 prospects in Southern California that I can target. Well, I'm not going to get all 10. So now I need to figure out how do I get, a potential market of 20 or 30 or 40. Maybe it's strictly expanding geography, or it's expanding the types of services, those kinds of things.
Okay. And once they do have like their branding, they have their niche, a small business or entrepreneur, what's the next step as far as messaging goes? Like you now have your branding, which should include like your personality, you're looking at your competitors, what makes you different. So having that differentiator, but what is the next step to messaging?
Well, it's consistency. And if I go on your website, if I look at your social post, if I get an email from you, there better be consistency in everything that you're saying. And so I like to look at a kind of an overarching message, and then I look at sub messages. So if my overarching message is, about us, using our strategic approach to defining a brand and positioning and marketing, but now I just want to talk about research. I have a sub message that only talks about research, but it brings in all the cues that I've laid as my foundation. Mm-hmm. So no matter who reads or sees what I'm doing, they know it's from me. They can understand. I'm not schizophrenic, right? I'm not saying one thing on my website and then turn around and saying something completely different. And then it's that elusive elevator pitch. You've got 30 seconds to say something that's meaningful, that shows value. And that's part of your branding too. I like to say, if you have a 30-second elevator ride and there's a prospect in the elevator with you, how do you get them interested in 30 seconds without rambling or, pounding your chest about all the great things you did? How do you convert that value to say, I want to know more, tell me more? And so all that becomes part of that messaging. And again, brand consistency and message consistency is essential.
Yeah. Okay. We're actually coming down to our time. That was pretty impactful, I think, and informational for you guys. I hope you picked up a lot on some of the things that Angelo shared with us. And thank you so much for joining us, Angelo. And your website again is craftmarketingandbranding.com, right? And
Yep.
also you could find Angelo on Facebook and LinkedIn. And just kind of sum up, what would be a good tip that you would give to a new coach once they have their kind of their branding, their niche, and they're looking at that messaging? What would be a first step for them?
Get out and network.
Yeah.
Find an organization or organizations, so multiple organizations that you want to get out to and find out if, it's either their prospects or their referral partners. I belong to several organizations where most of them are just really referral partners for me. They're not necessarily clients, and so I invest there. I've come to the conclusion I don't go to marketing association meetings anymore because it's basically hundreds of me. And so I don't want to be talking to them. I want to look for someone that might hire me. And so really, if you're niching in B2B and manufacturing, well, depending on where you are in the country, there are associations, there are groups that focus on that. Go to those, get a chance to meet people, do public speaking if you can. There's nothing better than showing up. Write an ebook. I'm actually updating a couple of ebooks on my website. One's on building a competitive analysis. Another one on storytelling, and they'll be up on my site soon. They're probably there, but I'm updating them, refreshing them, and a lot of blogs on my site too that are geared to a wide variety of topics. So you want to be a thought leader. You want to contribute out into the marketplace, and get your name known and define who you are and what you do.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Angelo, for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.